How many times have you wondered what truly makes Christmas such a special time of year? Is it the gifts, the bright lights, or maybe the frantic hustle and bustle that takes over the streets during the season? What if I told you that the true spirit of Christmas has nothing to do with any of that? It sounds counterintuitive, but the secret of Christmas might be something most of us don't even realize until it's too late. In a small town called Maplewood, a secret kept for decades challenges everything you think you know about this symbolic holiday. A story that goes far beyond decorations or the holiday feast. It's about a simple yet powerful act that changed lives, transformed hearts, and left a mark that no one can erase. And the most impressive part? This secret is closer to you than you might think. Get ready for an emotional journey filled with mystery, twists, and moments that will touch your soul. In this story, you'll discover how small gestures can carry the true magic of Christmas. A magic that isn't in storefronts, but in people's hearts. Are you ready to uncover the secret that could change the way you see Christmas? And maybe even your life? Once upon a time in a small American town called Maplewood, Christmas seemed straight out of a fairy tale. The lights twinkled like fallen stars, lighting up every street with a warm glow. People walked around with such genuine smiles that even the winter chill felt less harsh. Maplewood wasn't just a town. It was a place where dreams met reality, especially during the holiday season. But even with all this charm, there was something more, something words couldn't explain. The houses in Maplewood seemed to compete to show off the most Christmas spirit. There were reindeer made of lights in Sarah's backyard, the bakery owner, and a giant inflatable Santa on Pete the postman's porch. However, it wasn't the decorations that made Maplewood's Christmas so special, but what the residents felt in their hearts. There, each person seemed to carry the hope of a miracle, even if they didn't admit it out loud. Among the town's residents was Grace, an elderly woman full of energy, and with a smile that warmed even the coldest winter nights. Her presence was like a kind of silent magic, but no one knew much about her past. Whenever someone asked, Grace would change the subject with a laugh and a funny story. This only made the mystery surrounding her even more intriguing. On the other side of town, Ethan, a young journalist who had just moved in, was trying to adapt to Maplewood's quiet routine. He had swapped the hustle and bustle of New York for the tranquility of the countryside, searching for something he couldn't even describe. Ethan was naturally curious and quickly noticed that Grace seemed to be hiding a secret. But he knew it would take more than direct questions to uncover what it was. December nights brought with them an almost reverent silence, as if the town itself was waiting for something extraordinary. Ethan felt it around every corner, but he still couldn't pinpoint what it was. Something big seemed to be hidden behind the light sparkle and the residents' joy. And the more he observed, the more he was drawn into the mystery. Maplewood wasn't just a place. It was almost like a living character, with secrets and stories that seemed eager to be told. Every lit window hid a little narrative. Every corner carried memories that whispered in the wind. It was impossible not to be enveloped by that magical atmosphere, which seemed to promise that anything was possible, even a miracle. Then, on a night when the snow fell like a soft veil, Ethan saw something that changed everything. A quick glance, a subtle gesture, something that would go unnoticed by anyone else, but not by him. He wasn't quite sure what it was, but he was certain he was witnessing a story that needed to be told. And so, fate began to weave the first threads of a plot he would never forget. Ethan, with his insatiable curiosity, quickly realized that Maplewood held more secrets than it appeared. Between cups of coffee at the cozy local cafe, he heard about a mysterious event that took place every Christmas night. It was something no one openly talked about, but the whispered conversations and furtive glances among the townspeople told a different story. As a journalist, Ethan knew how to recognize a good lead, and this had all the ingredients to be the story of his life. The first person he decided to talk to was Thomas, the owner of the town's old antique shop. Thomas had an enigmatic expression and seemed to know more than he was letting on. Between polishing a pocket watch and rearranging some old books, he dropped a line that left Ethan intrigued. Not everything that shines on Christmas nights is just lights, kid. Ethan tried to press for more details, but Thomas just smiled and changed the subject, as if he enjoyed the game of leaving Ethan with unanswered questions. Unsatisfied, Ethan sought answers from Lila, a dream-filled waitress who seemed to know everything happening in Maplewood. Lila was young, but the way she spoke had a touch of wisdom hidden behind light-hearted banter. Oh, the mystery of Christmas Eve? Maybe you need to be in the right place at the right time. Who knows, Ethan? Maybe you'll discover something no one else has. Despite her relaxed tone, there was something in Lila's eyes that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. With each conversation, the mystery seemed to deepen. It was like trying to put together a puzzle where the pieces insisted on not fitting. Ethan started noticing small details. The exchanged glances between residents, the way the town fell almost silent as Christmas approached. Everything seemed to suggest that something big was happening. But what? And more importantly, why was no one talking about it openly? The nights leading up to Christmas carried an electric charge in the air, as if something was about to happen. Ethan felt it even in his small apartment, where the blinking lights outside his window could barely compete with the thoughts occupying his mind. He needed to uncover the truth. But how when it seemed like the entire town was conspiring to keep the secret? Among the few details he managed to piece together, one thing was clear. This mystery had deep roots in the town's history. It wasn't just a random event. There was something significant and possibly transformative about it. Ethan knew he would need to dig deep to find the answers, but the more he searched, the more it seemed Maplewood wanted him to stay in the dark. And it was on a cold night, while watching the lights reflect on the snow, that Ethan had an idea. If no one was willing to talk, maybe it was time to look for evidence on his own. He decided to start at the town's flea market, where old relics and forgotten memories might hold clues. What he didn't know was that this decision would bring him one step closer to something that would change his life forever. The Maplewood Flea Market was a maze of antique objects, each with a story waiting to be told. Ethan walked among the stalls, smelling the unmistakable scent of aged wood and yellowed paper. He examined everything carefully until something caught his eye. A hardcover diary, worn by time. The name Grace was engraved in gold letters on the cover, almost faded but still legible. His journalistic intuition kicked into high gear. Flipping through the diary, Ethan realized it wasn't just an ordinary record. The pages were filled with emotional and enigmatic accounts. One passage in particular made him stop. The night that changed everything. The date was over 40 years old, and the words seemed to carry a weight he still couldn't understand. Who could have imagined that Grace, that charismatic and seemingly ordinary lady, held something so profound? Each page of the diary was an invitation to dive deeper into the mystery. Grace described a secret meeting that took place on a Christmas night, full of acts of kindness and courage. The tone was filled with emotion, but the words also left questions hanging in the air. What exactly had happened that night? And how did it still affect the town so many years later? Ethan felt a chill run down his spine, sensing he was facing something bigger than he had imagined. Determined to learn more, Ethan went to Grace's house. The diary was a key to a past that seemed waiting to be unraveled. Grace opened the door with her usual smile, but her eyes revealed a mix of surprise and apprehension upon seeing the diary in Ethan's hands. He explained how he had found it, and carefully asked if she could tell him more about what was written there. Grace hesitated, but something in Ethan's sincere gaze seemed to convince her to open a small part of her story. "Not everything is in the diary, my boy," Grace said, adjusting her glasses delicately. "But if you're so curious, maybe it's time I tell you a bit about what happened that night." Ethan could barely contain his excitement, but realized he needed to give Grace space to speak at her own pace. The weight of what was to come seemed to fill the air around them. As she spoke, Grace mentioned people Ethan had never heard of. Faces forgotten by the town, but who had made a profound impact that Christmas night. Her voice was soft but laden with emotion. Each word seemed to draw Ethan closer to a truth he knew would change everything. It was as if he could feel the past coming to life around them. Grace paused the story, smiling slightly. But that, Ethan, is just the beginning. Her tone suggested there was much more to uncover, and the young journalist knew he needed to listen to every word. He left Grace's house that night certain he had found not just a good story, but something that had the power to touch lives, including his own. Grace, with a nostalgic sparkle in her eyes, began to recount the events of that Christmas night that had forever marked her life. She remembered how the town was caught in a snowstorm that transformed even the most familiar places into a sea of white. The streets became impassable, and the biting cold seemed to swallow everything. She and James, her late husband, were in the living room, cozy with a hot cup of tea, when they heard frantic knocking at the door. On the doorstep stood a group of homeless people, shivering from the cold with faces etched by hopelessness. Grace recounted how James, without hesitation, invited them in. It wasn't a hard decision, she said with a melancholic smile. It was Christmas, and no one deserves to go through that alone. Ethan, listening to every word, felt that these memories were much more than simple recollections. They were pieces of a life shaped by tough choices and acts of love. While the storm raged outside, Grace's house became an unexpected refuge. James lit the fireplace. Grace prepared a warm soup with whatever they had in the pantry, and together they improvised beds with blankets and pillows. But it wasn't just the physical warmth they offered. It was something deeper. Grace described how, even in the face of so many difficulties, that night was filled with timid laughter and shared stories. It was as if the magic of Christmas had invaded that small space. Ethan listened attentively as Grace recalled the details with surprising clarity. It wasn't easy, she admitted, but that night we were all family. Amid the chaos, James led the group in Christmas carols, and Grace improvised small gifts wrapped in pieces of newspaper. Everything was so simple, but each gesture carried a symbolic weight that turned that night into something unforgettable. However, Grace confessed that not everyone in town viewed their actions favorably. Some residents criticized her decision to take in strangers, fearing it would bring trouble to the community. But she and James never hesitated. "We knew it was the right thing to do," Grace said firmly. "And sometimes, doing the right thing means facing others' judgment." As she spoke, Grace seemed to be reliving not only the joy but also the pain of that night. She mentioned how James, always so optimistic, said that miracles happen when people choose kindness above all else. Ethan felt a lump in his throat hearing this, realizing that the story wasn't just about that group of homeless people, but something bigger, a lesson in humanity that the town needed to learn. Grace paused, looking at Ethan as if weighing her next words. "But that, my dear, was just the beginning," she said, leaving a sense that there was much more to be revealed. Ethan left Grace's house that night feeling that each piece of the puzzle was falling into place, but something was still missing, something he was about to discover. Restless about Grace's story, Ethan began connecting the dots. It wasn't just a matter of charity that cold night. There was something bigger, something the town itself seemed to have embraced without realizing. His curiosity led him to seek more answers, and that's how he met Emma, a young woman with a warm smile and eyes that held stories. When Emma mentioned Grace, she lit up. "She saved my life," she said, without a hint of exaggeration. Emma explained that she was just a child on the night of the storm, part of the group Grace and James took in. As she spoke, Ethan felt the weight of her words. Emma described how Grace not only provided shelter, but also a chance to start over. "She gave us something more than a warm place to sleep," Emma said, tears in her eyes. "She gave us dignity." That night, Ethan realized, wasn't just an isolated event. It was the beginning of a tradition that would shape lives. As they talked further, Emma revealed something that took Ethan by surprise. Every year since that night, Grace organized a special celebration for homeless families. But she did it in secret, without seeking recognition. "She doesn't want anyone to know," Emma explained, almost whispering. "For her, it's not about the glory, but but the impact. Ethan felt his heart tighten, imagining how many lives Grace had touched without anyone knowing. Intrigued, Ethan began to investigate this secret tradition more deeply. He discovered that, quietly, Grace mobilized the community to donate food, clothing, and gifts. Many participated without even knowing where the donations were going. "She's an invisible force," Lila, the waitress, said admiringly. "She does all this as if it were the most natural thing in the world." Ethan knew he had found something extraordinary. But what truly impressed Ethan was the lasting impact of these actions. He met others who, like Emma, had been transformed by Grace's generosity. There were stories of people who had rebuilt their lives, found new opportunities, and now helped others in similar situations. It was like a circle of kindness that kept growing, fueled by the determination of one woman. When Ethan returned to talk to Grace, she just smiled and said, "It's not about me, Ethan. It's about all of us." But as she said this, Ethan realized she was the heart of everything. Her humility, her ability to see beyond appearances, was what made that tradition so powerful. It was as if Grace had understood something the whole world needed to learn. The magic of Christmas isn't in the lights or the gifts, but in the small acts of love. Ethan felt he was approaching something big, something that needed to be seen to be understood. Grace, with her calm wisdom, invited him to join that year's celebration. "Come see with your own eyes," she said, with a sparkle in her eyes that seemed to hold the secret of life itself. Ethan accepted, knowing he was about to witness something that would change not only his view of Christmas, but also himself. Finally, the long-awaited Christmas night arrived, and Maplewood seemed even more magical than the days before. The lights shone brightly, reflecting off the softly falling snowflakes, as if the sky itself wanted to join the celebration. Ethan walked through the town streets with his heart racing. Grace had invited him to the secret celebration, and he had no idea what to expect. But one thing was certain. He was about to witness something extraordinary. When he arrived at the location Grace had indicated, an old community hall in the town center, Ethan was speechless. Inside, the space had been transformed into a cozy refuge. Long tables were set with simple yet immaculate linen tablecloths. Steaming plates of homemade food filled the room with comforting aromas. People were talking, laughing, and sharing stories as if they were one big family. Ethan felt he was witnessing the true spirit of Christmas. Grace, at the center of it all, radiated serenity. She moved from table to table, talking to everyone, making sure no one felt forgotten. Beside her, a framed photo of James held a place of honor. "He'd be so proud of this," she said to Ethan, with a smile that mixed longing and gratitude. The celebration was more than just a gathering. It was a tribute to love, solidarity, and the memory of those who made a difference. And then, in the most emotional moment of the night, Grace called for everyone's attention. With a steady yet heartfelt voice, she began to tell the story of how it all started. Her narrative was simple but powerful, and each word seemed to carry a piece of Maplewood's soul. Ethan watched the reactions around him. Some were quietly crying, others were smiling tenderly, but everyone seemed deeply moved. It was as if the spirit of James and the others who had helped that magical night were present. After the speech, there was a symbolic exchange of gifts. No luxury items, no flashiness, just small gestures. A pair of wool gloves, a handmade mug, a notebook. Each gift came with a story or a note of thanks, making them infinitely more valuable. Ethan realized it wasn't about the objects themselves, but the meaning behind them. It was an exchange of humanity, care, and love. By the end of the night, Ethan felt something different. It wasn't just gratitude or inspiration. It was transformation. He realized there was something in Maplewood that went beyond rational understanding. It was as if that small act of bringing people together, sharing stories, and caring for one another had the power to change lives. Deep down, he knew his own life would never be the same. As the hall began to empty and the snow continued to fall outside, Grace approached Ethan. "So, what do you think?" she asked with a look of camaraderie. Ethan, speechless, just smiled. He knew he still needed to put into words what he had witnessed, but that night, he felt the story was only beginning, and what was to come next would be as exciting as what he had just experienced. Ethan returned to his small apartment in Maplewood that same night, but couldn't sleep. The sound of snow against the window and the warmth of the fireplace seemed to echo the message he had witnessed. As he watched the lights twinkling on the living room tree, he began to write. The words flowed as if they had been waiting to come to life. The secret of Christmas night wasn't just a story. It was a truth he knew he had to share with the world. In the article, Ethan recounted every detail of that magical night, but didn't limit himself to the facts. He wrote about Grace, about James, and how small acts of kindness had transformed not only lives but an entire town. He highlighted how the impact of these actions spread, like ripples on a calm lake. To him, the most important lesson was simple. The true magic of Christmas lies in what we choose to do for one another. As the words took shape, Ethan realized he wasn't just a spectator of that story. He had also been transformed by it, remembering the sparkle in Grace's eyes, the laughter in the community hall, and the gifts filled with meaning. He felt something change within himself. For the first time in years, he truly believed in miracles. Not grand, inexplicable ones, but the ones we create when we choose to love, even in the face of difficulties. When he finally finished the article, Ethan sent it to his editor with a personal note. This isn't just a Christmas story. It's a reminder of who we can be. The next day, the story was published, and the impact was immediate. People from all over began writing to Grace, to Maplewood, and even to Ethan, sharing how the story had touched their lives. It was as if the message of love and solidarity had found new hearts to inhabit. But for Ethan, the greatest reward was something more intimate. A few weeks later, he returned to the community hall and found Grace organizing donations for the next celebration. "You did a beautiful job with the words, Ethan," she said, with a warm smile. He humbly replied, "I just tried to do justice to what you created here." The exchange of glances between them said more than any dialogue could express. As he left the hall, Ethan reflected on how that article was just the beginning. There were many more stories waiting to be told, many more lives waiting for small miracles. He knew his mission now was to find those stories and share them with the world, hoping to inspire others to believe in the transformative power of kindness. And as the snow fell once more, he realized that Maplewood had become a part of who he was. Grace and Maplewood's story wasn't about a place or a specific night. It was about what happens when we choose to see the best in others, even in the toughest situations. And that message, Ethan knew, would never go out of style. After all, the true secret of Christmas was there, simple and powerful. Love always finds a way. So, what are you going to do with this story? The magic of Christmas doesn't have to be confined to the pages of a script or the lights of a fictional town like Maplewood. It can be in your choices, your gestures, and your attitudes toward those around you. Can you imagine the impact you could have by reaching out to someone in need, even with something small? What's stopping you from starting to create your own miracles? Life is made up of moments and choices, and you have the power to make every Christmas truly unforgettable, not just for yourself, but for everyone you cross paths with. And you know what the secret is? It's not the big actions that transform lives, but the small gestures filled with love and intention. Now, think with me. What would be possible if everyone decided to live Christmas this way? And you, are you willing to transform not just your Christmas, but everyone around you? If this story inspired you in any way, I invite you to take action, to be the change you wish to see. And before moving on to the next video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you'll keep discovering exciting stories that can not only warm your heart, but also motivate you to live a more meaningful life. Let's spread this message together